what I will be able to do in the next 15 minutes, I think, is to give you a very high-level introduction to the electronics watch model, just touching on some of the key themes. And then I would really very much look forward to the discussion based upon that presentation. I think that's probably where the more interesting parts of the session will come out. So let me just launch into this, and you can hear me, you can see my screen okay, right? Okay, good. So to start, first of all, what we do. I just want to put that in a very simple sentence to you here. We coordinate independent monitoring and remediation to help public buyers to protect the rights of workers in the electronic supply chain. And we do that so that public buyers can use their leverage to drive improvements for workers in their supply chains, in other words, in the supply chains of the products that they are buying. We do that also so to be able to hold companies in public procurement supply chains to account for rights violations. And we do that so that workers in public procurement supply chains can organize to realize their rights. So coordinating the independent monitoring and remediation on behalf of public buyers is at the core of what we do. How we work. So here are the three core pillars of our model. It's looking bottom to top here. First, public procurement leverage. Second, worker-driven monitoring. Third, industry engagement. So I will, in the presentation, I will go into each one of these pillars a little bit more in depth. But public procurement leverage has to do with supporting public buyers who are affiliated to Electronics Watch in their tender development, in their contract management, in the dialogue that they have with their suppliers to drive respect for worker rights in their supply chains. A lot of, as Alejandro mentioned, a lot of practical tools, a lot of trainings, fostering collaboration. Worker-driven monitoring pillar involves a lot of training on monitoring methodology with monitoring partners who are local civil society organizations that are located around the world, close as near as possible to workers' own communities. Worker-driven monitoring, of course, also involves coordinating and supporting the monitoring process and the remediation process. And it's also about supporting trade unions and worker committees and understanding how and engaging trade unions so they themselves can use the Electronics Watch model for change. And industry engagement, of course, is about how we work with companies, how we work with industry in general to drive remedy and corrective action both on a case-by-case basis, but also when there are opportunities on case-by-case, I mean factory case basis, but also on an issue-based level. So just a map of who we are here in the, what's the color, bluish, greenish color that's marked here. This is where our affiliates are located. You see mostly in the Western Europe and also in Australia. And there are, all in all, there are more than 900 public buyers who are affiliated to Electronics Watch and basically coordinate their monitoring and remediation activities through Electronics Watch. And then in the other color here, the colors I don't name up, but the darker color here is where our monitoring partners are located. Again, mostly in Asia, because that is, of course, where the electronics manufacturing industry and also some of the mining is concentrated. But also in Europe, you see in Poland, Hungary, and Czechia, and we're starting to do more work in the mining sector as well in Bolivia, DRC, Indonesia, and Philippines. So now to just go into a very high level in terms of each one of these three pillars: public procurement, worker-driven monitoring, and industry engagement. This is just to show how we try to support the public buyers, throughout the public procurement process, starting at the pre-tender level, during the tender, and during the contract management phase. I'm not going to talk more about it, but instead going to go to the next slide, the two next slides here. The point of this being that the procurement process is a long process. We often think of procurement perhaps as a point where a public buyer makes a decision to buy something or not, or they apply some certain selection criteria, certain award criteria. But it's important for us to realize that that process starts a lot earlier. Very beginning, define the need. What are you going to buy? Does the need involve, okay, I need computers, but I also need computers that are made in decent working conditions. That's part of the need, and everything else flows from there. And the point of this being that every step of this procurement process, a public buyer can include worker rights criteria and discussions with suppliers about worker rights in supply chains, and we try to support them to do that throughout the process. But it's important also to recognize that we emphasize one part of the process, and that is a contract management phase. So basically, the tender process. This is the start, from the start where you define the need. What do you want to buy, until the point where you actually define the criteria and issue an award. That can be 6 to 18 months in process. So that's a significant process, of course. But what happens afterwards, the contract management phase, you have a contract with a supplier, that contract needs to be managed. That's a much longer process. That's 2 to 7 years. And so this is why we're focusing on the contract management phase in terms of our support with public buyers. We have developed a model contract clauses that the contractor, that the company must comply with during the phase of the contract management. And our affiliates use that model. Some use the model in entirety, some use it partially, but the core parts of it are used to drive basically the suppliers to provide supply chain transparency, to ensure that there's collaboration with Electronics Watch independent monitors, and to ensure remedy and corrective action when we report violations. So the contract management, contract conditions that our affiliates are putting into their contracts basically say, you are responsible for supply chain transparency, collaboration, and remedy. So this is, in very high level terms, how we work with public buyers. It's a very time intensive, very labor intensive process. They need tools, but more than the tools, they need training, they need consultation. There's constant back and forth. There are a lot of one-on-ones with public buyers. The second pillar is a worker-driven monitoring. And of course, the monitoring is basically what we try to feed our public buyers with the monitoring results from our monitoring partners. And in order to drive the results, we have developed a methodology with detailed guidances, and we do trainings. So what we call worker-driven monitoring is this, in very broad terms. It's a methodology where workers are always at the center of the process. Workers themselves can initiate the monitoring process through a complaint, through a grievance. Workers will be involved in discussing the monitoring results. We'll share the monitoring results with the key workers, with the trade union if there's an appropriate trade union in place, and we'll try to work with the workers also to develop solutions, i.e., involve them in the remediation process. The monitoring has to be evidence-driven. The stronger the evidence that we have of particular issues, violations, or even risks, the better we're able to drive change with companies. So we always look for corroboration, having multiple sources of evidence, using both qualitative and quantitative methods to generate the evidence, and of course, very carefully analyzing the data then against both the labor law that applies in the particular country and also the core international standards. And the goal here is, of course, both that violations are addressed, but also reparations or remedy for the workers themselves, and that we also look at, how can these violations be prevented in the future. Lots more to say about this, of course, but this is a very top-level overview. Also important to say that the worker-driven monitoring is a process. As I said, it can start with a grievance from workers. If we find that the complaint is credible, it's relevant, we proceed with an investigation that is also being carried out by local monitoring partners whom have been trained. Following the investigation and the initial reports, is the industry engagement to drive change here, to discuss, okay, here are the issues, and here's a remedy, here's a corrective action that needs to be taken. And that's a long process. I'll touch upon that a little bit later, but this is basically a remediation methodology. But throughout this whole process, we don't really stop monitoring with, sorry about that. If there's a trade union, we have constant contact with the trade union. The trade union always facilitates this process a lot to understand, what is happening during the process of corrective action, during the process of remediation in the factory. What is happening when the companies are doing the audits, when the companies themselves are doing the investigations. We continue to monitor. You mentioned social audits, of course. Clear difference, of course, and there are many differences, is that this process is ongoing. Social audits are, as you know, temporary in nature, snapshots. So the third pillar is industry engagement. And so here, just a very schematic overview of what it is and what it isn't. First of all, we try to drive change with the companies through dialogue and through collaboration, and we try to support public buyers themselves in following up with companies, i.e., their suppliers, on the contractual requirements. And also to support them in their regular dialogue that they have with suppliers, so that they can, so we bring the monitoring issues to their attention so they can discuss it with their suppliers. We don't do naming and shaming of companies, but at the same time, it's important that we don't have partnerships or alliances with companies in any sense. They're not members of Electronics Watch. They don't have a voice. And we don't go out and say we have a partnership with them. What we do have is our terms of engagement with the Responsible Business Alliance. And you may be familiar with the RBA, or Responsible Business Alliance. It's I think the largest industry association of any kind that is focusing on driving compliance with a code of conduct among their members. And so their auditing and code program covers a membership right now that includes most of the electronics industry, but also beyond the electronics industry. And I think their members in total have combined for an annual revenue of between 7 to 8 trillion US dollars. So it's a huge organization. What we have done with the RBA is we have defined a framework with a very specific process, very specific responsibilities delineated, very specific timeline that come into play when we report that there are violations in a particular factory that is both in our affiliate supply chain and also in the supply chain of an RBA member, or sometimes the factory itself is actually an RBA member. So we have a very we have very specific steps that need to be followed when we report a violation to them, and the goal here is always to then improve the compliance with international recognized codes and worker rights, and also to strengthen workers' capacity to defend their own rights. Lots more to be said about these terms. We're actually the version that you can find right now on our website is soon to be replaced by a version 2, which is a improvement on these terms, I think. But so there's lots here to talk about as well. But the terms are is a outcome of a negotiation, and so it's always a compromise. And like we can discuss upon where they're strong, where they're not strong, where we want to go with this, and so on. But the terms themselves, I should mention, is a affirmation and a recognition of the power of the public buyers in this model, because there's no question that the industry talks to us, the industry negotiates with us and works with us because of the leverage of the public buyers, no other reason. So here is this all, if you want to put it all together, the process. It starts with the data that we get from our monitoring partners, and we generate a report about rights issues in a particular factory. That report first goes to the companies. It could be to RBA, could be to a brand. At the same time, we alert our affiliates that we have a report on certain issues, that we've started the process of engagement with them. That initiates a process of improvement with RBA. If this is not working somehow, then there's always then this is the role of the public buyers. They can then raise those issues with the suppliers. They could even enforce their contracts to ensure that those issues are being addressed. And then after there's been a process of corrective action and remedy, we put together a second report to share with affiliates, and finally a final report goes to the public. That is very high level, the key themes in our model. So with that, I will stop talking, and hopefully we can have some discussion.